If you're not fulfilling your creative potential as a neurodivergent multipotentialite, then it's probably because of this reason. I spent 28 years as a multi-platinum artist manager in the music industry. I now do lots of creative coaching with multipotentialite neurodivergence, specifically on this. And this is a problem that all creative people have in my experience. I'm not saying every single I've not met every single creative person, but every creative person that I have met and I have worked with has had this problem, okay? And this is that we're very creative, and that's great, right? But that means we have lots of ideas, which again is a huge bonus. Our greatest strength is we have lots and lots of ideas. Our greatest weakness is we don't take action on those ideas. Why? Because we get overwhelmed with the paradox of choice, right? Which means we get stuck and then we procrastinate. Now, our self-esteem as neurodivergent creative multipotentialites, our self-esteem is based on our productivity. So if we're procrastinating, then we're beating ourselves up. And if we're beating ourselves up, that means we lose our creative confidence. And if we lose our creative confidence, that means we don't take action on ideas. So in other words, this just goes around and around and around. Now, as I say, I've worked with multi-platinum artists, people that have sold millions of albums that have experienced this problem. So this is not something about being successful or unsuccessful. This is just how the creative brain works, okay? And this is because of multipotentiality, neurodivergence, etc., etc., right? So let's dig into this deeper, okay? Because this is my insights of over 30 years of working with creative people. And obviously, look, I'm a neurodivergent multipotentialite too, so this is also how my brain works, right? So let's look at it deeper, right? We're not taking action. So why are we not taking action? Well, it's because we're avoiding making decisions. Why are we avoiding making decisions? Well, we fear of picking the wrong idea or the wrong option and wasting our time, right? Which means we start procrastinating, because if we're not making decisions, right, we're staying stuck. Now, if we're procrastinating, we're beating ourselves up because our self-esteem is directly linked to our productivity. And why are we beating ourselves up? Because we're wasting our time. And this is why it's a paradox, right? So the reason it's a paradox is because it's a divergent thinking paradox. The fear of wasting our time means that we end up wasting our time. And we're procrastinating. And what do we do when we're procrastinating? We're on social media, or we're comfort eating, or we're on Netflix, or we're YouTube. We're doing these numbing behaviors, right? Because we're avoiding the stress and the anxiety of making a decision because we fear wasting our time, right? So how can we get out of this, right? So here's the thing about decisions, right? If we've got, say, 4 different ideas for a business, right? We don't know which is the right one, okay? Now, we have no idea. We can't predict the future, right? So here's the thing with ideas. An idea can look great on paper, but can turn out to be a disaster, right? Because there's so many different moving parts. And of course, it's the butterfly effect. Because when I make a decision, then that may create a reaction from you, which may create a reaction from somebody else, and blah, 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 blah. There's a whole chain of events we can't control, right? So an idea that looks great on paper can turn out to be a disaster. Something that looks like shit can end up turning into gold, right? We have absolutely no way of knowing whether a decision is good or bad until we actually take it, right? But the reason we're not making decisions is because we're trying to make the perfect decision. And the perfect decision does not exist, right? That is a fallacy in our brains, okay? So how do we make decisions? Well, the best way to make decisions are decisions that are authentic to you. If we can't predict which ideas are good or bad, then the only thing we can use as a gauge is like, is it authentic to me? Is it an authentically creative decision? Because as multipotentialite neurodivergence, one of our key drivers is to be authentic, right? So how can we make decisions that are authentic to us? Well, we have to make core value-based decisions. Now, so you can go in, you can Google this, and there's a whole bunch of core values. My core values are like creativity, authenticity, freedom, growth, etc., right? Rebellion, all these kind of things. So these are my core values. So I can look at the different ideas and say, well, does this tap into my creativity? Does this tap into my authenticity? Does this tap into, is it rebellious? Is it about freedom? Is it about growth, etc., etc., right? Now, this helps me make core-based decisions. Now, this is honestly, it's a very difficult thing to do because we're overthinkers and because there's over 200 core values, it's very difficult for us to pick 5 of them. And even when we do pick those 5, it's very difficult to take every single idea and put it through this lens. Now, we're actually creating an AI app, an interactive guided course of an AI assistant, which basically helps us do this. Think of like Myers-Briggs, but for core values and authenticity as opposed to personality tests, and that's what we're building. But that's another video for another day, right? In the meantime, this is the best way to be able to do this. Now, how can you tell how can you move forward, right? So let's say you have lots of ideas. Let's say you want to start out, I don't know, you want to start a social media presence or something like that. You can iterate and you can do short tests. So in startup world, they call it minimum viable products, right? I call it minimum viable creativity, okay? So instead of writing a whole album, right, write a single, okay? Instead of writing a whole book, which takes like 2 years or something like that, start writing blog posts. If people like your blog posts, right, that gives you encouragement to then go and write the book. Mark Manson, James Clear, these books that they have written, who have gone on to sell tens and tens of millions of copies, are based on their most popular blog posts or newsletters, whatever, right? So you can do minimum viable creativity. Listen, if you don't, I've got a TikTok account, over 150,000 followers on that. That started off as a creative experiment. I said I'll post 30 videos in 30 days on TikTok and I'll see how it goes. Now, I enjoyed it. If I didn't enjoy it, I could walk away after the 30 days. But on day 31, I put out a video with David Bowie being a multipotentialite. That went viral. And as you know, one thing led to another, and here we are, right? I would not be creating this video if I hadn't put out that video on day 31. And that's because it was a creative experiment. The point of having these creative experiments is it takes the pressure off us, because we're perfectionists, it takes the pressure of us to, make it let's say this has to be the best TikTok account in the world. This has to be the best podcast in the world. Our perfectionism overtakes us, right? Whereas if we just look at these things as creative experiments and we do them for 30 days, that helps us remove our creative identities. It helps us get out of the perfectionistic spirals, which ends up self-sabotaging our creative ideas, okay? Once we start in experiments, right, we're then in motion theory. So the theory of motion is that something in motion, it's easier to keep it in motion. So if you're continually making creative experiments, you will eventually, through time, find your ideal creative outlet. So that's how it worked for me. So I've got my newsletter, I've got my TikTok, I've got my coaching, one-to-one business. All of these things are successful, and now this is me going, diversifying into YouTube, right? So something that's in motion, it's easier to keep it in motion. But the inverse is also true. Something that's stuck, that's not making decisions here, okay, seeking the perfect decision, it's really hard to get that going. So if you're here at this point seeking to make the perfect decision, fear of wasting your time, it's going to be harder for you to start gaining momentum. But you've only got two options. You either stay stuck, stay where you are right now, or you start making decisions, core value-based decisions, and start experimenting to get into motion, right? So let's look at why we don't make decisions, right? Well, it's the fear of wasting time. We've already covered that. It's seeking the perfect decision. There's no such thing as a perfect decision. But our brains, the chances are you're a highly intelligent, creative person, right? And the thing about being intelligent is that our brain convinces us we can think our way out of overthinking, right? Because we are really good problem solvers. So you can solve my problems, I can solve your problems, but I find it very difficult to solve my own problems because it's difficult to read the label when we're stuck in the jar, right? But because we can solve other people's problems, we think we can solve our own problems. So that's why we're seeking the perfect decision. Our brains trick us into thinking, hey, if we just think about this decision, this overthinking, for a bit longer, we'll eventually work out which is the perfect decision. Because we know one decision's better than ever. And this is like fear, FOBO. Not instead of FOMO, fear of missing out, it's FOBO, fear of a better option. Right? And that's what keeps us stuck. And of course there's the fear of failure, the not being good enough, the shame about that. If you go and look at my previous videos, particularly one about social conditioning, I talk about why we have a fear of failure, why we have of not being good enough, and that's because we're neurodivergent, born into a neurotypical society, and we have been rejected from that. We've always felt that we've never fitted in, we've tried to fit in, etc., etc. So these are all reasons why we have to stop worrying what other people think. The reason we care what other people think is because we want to be accepted by society that's going to continually reject us. We have to start accepting ourselves, and you get this from creative authenticity. How do you create creative authenticity? It's creating work based on our core values, and that's creating work for ourselves, okay? So that is the audience comes last. If you have ever read Rick Rubin's book, David Bowie was the same. He always said that he was a selfish creative. He created and performed for himself because he could never second guess what the audience wants. And this is the right creative mindset. This is what we have to do. We have to create businesses for ourselves, create work for ourselves. But once we've created it, then we find an audience for it, okay? Then we commercialize it. So I hope this helps, and yeah, peace out.